Now we're going to deal a little bit more with color correction and changing our photos. So let's open up the next one we need in our files. File open. And this time open the one called Storm. And we can see that this is 18 megabytes and it is in RGB. That's fine for right now. Let's use some adjustments. So we need to go into the photography workspace. I'm going to click right here and make sure I'm in the photography workspace. And you'll see several things. This is our histogram and it's telling us how the exposure is and how the color balance is. You can see from looking at this that it is a little pink. I just want to change this a little bit before we save it. Now the main thing that's going to pop up right here is adjustments, because it knows we're in photography. It knows we probably want to change it. So what type of adjustments might we want to change? Hue, saturation, color balance, all those type of things. So I can see that this photo, the color is a little strange and actually the exposure is strange. A good exposure, this should go all the way over to both sides, and it is not doing that. So the exposure is a little bit off here. We're going to use something called curves, which can help us both with color and with exposure. So if you just click on curves right here, you will notice that it has made a new layer for us down here. This is an adjustment layer, and it has made a mask. This right here is a mask. So if I turn it on and off, nothing's happening because we haven't made any adjustments. So let's deal a little bit with the kind of exposure of this. I had told you I want the histogram to be a little bit more even. So down here, I'm going to say, I want the white level to go all the way to the side. So just pick this up right here and move this over. And do you see how it's changed our histogram and it's made it a lot brighter? Now we don't want to just make everything brighter because that would make our blacks kind of gray. If you look at this photo, you can see there's not really any blacks. And if you look at the histogram, black would be over here to the left. So we don't have any true blacks. So let's pick this up and say, make the blackest thing here a true black. Now I don't want to go all the way over just because it becomes too extreme. So you can't completely fix something without it looking messed up. I think that's looking a lot better as far as exposure goes. So very easily we have changed the exposure. Now there's AI built into Photoshop now, and it can do a pretty good job. Do you see this little button called Auto? This is kind of what I think looks better. Let's see what the computer thinks looks better. I'm going to click Auto. Oh, and it has changed it a lot. Do you see that it's put these little dots on here? I actually kind of don't want to do that because it's messed with the color. Remember I told you that curves deals with exposure and color. I'm actually going to Control Z to undo that auto and leave it back the way I did it because I want to mess with the colors separately. But realize that auto is a good place to start. Lots of times I will just click auto and then I will adjust from there. Let's now kind of break it up, the RGB. If you click right here, you can see we have the red, green, and blue. So let's click right here. So let's deal with the colors. Right here where it says RGB, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go to the blue area. Now this is kind of weird. Realize if ever you mess things up, you can always hit this little button right here, which means reset. So you can just reset it, or of course you can hit Control Z for undo. But what we want to do is we want to add a little bit more blue to our blue areas. If we were to just grab it down here, it's going to change everything. I want to use this little line here. You're just going to click and drag slightly up in the middle. And you see it kind of left the whites and the blacks alone, but it just brought the midtones up to black. If you want to see what that looks like without, you can click this little eyeball and it turns it back off. Can you see it added blue into this? So that's looking a lot more blue. Now I'd like to bring down the red. So click on the red channel and we're going to click here in the middle and just pull the red down some. And once again, there it is without the red. So here it is without that red being brought down, and here it is with the red being brought down. If you go over here into your layers panel and turn it on and off, you can see we've made a huge difference to both the brightness of this and the color. So that is a very easy way to do color correction. At the very least, put curves on and click auto. Now I'm not saying this is the only way to change color. There are a lot of ways to change color. And if you've been in my digital photography class, we talk about all the different ways to change color. But I would say that curves is kind of one of the strongest ways, and that's the way we're going to change this photo. I'm not saying it's always the best way to change every photo, but that looks pretty good. So now we need to save this. We are going to be using it on the web. So we know because we're going to be using on the web, it needs to be in RGB. So let's see if it's in RGB. Image mode, yes, it is in RGB. That's good. Let's see how big our file size is. It is 18 meg, not too bad, but let's see what we can do. So the best way to save for web is to say File, File, Export, Export As. And let's see what we do. If we change it to JPEG, that is a lot smaller than it was. Let's see what it does if we do PNG. Okay, it's a lot bigger. So I think let's look at the two up and see if we can see the difference between the two. For PNG and JPEG, the original, it is a lot smaller. I think JPEG is looking fine. So I am going to choose JPEG. 6 is looking fine to me. I'm going to go ahead and let it convert to what the web likes. I'm not going to embed my color profile. This size is a good size. I could make it full screen for a web page if I needed to, and it's not a huge file size, so I think this is good. Let's go ahead and hit export. And we're going to put this in our work in progress. We're going to call this Roberts, or whatever your last name is, Storm for Web. And hit save. All right, so you've done your first color correction. Let's move on. Now we need to open the next file, which is going to be called food. And hit open. Now we are in the photography workspace, and most people would look at this and think it looks okay, even though this salmon looks really ugly. But it actually does have color issues. I'm actually going to grab my eyedropper tool, and this is a great thing to try to kind of show you if your eye can't see what's wrong with it. If you click on this eyedropper and then choose something that we think is probably white. So let's click kind of right here. And if we look down at this, what it just sampled, and double click on it, you can see that this actually is not white, it's green. So we need to color correct for green. So I'm going to say okay. Now, we used curves before. We could grab curves and pull down the green a little bit like we did with the other one, but let's try a different one. We're going to try color balance, and it's going to bring all of this up. And what's good about color balance is it has a choice that you could say, do you want to change the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights? In this, we mainly are worried with the midtones and the highlights. So let's start with the midtones. And we want to do the opposite of the problem. We need to add more magenta in this to get rid of the green. So let's just add a little bit of magenta. And when you do that, you can see that this back here was actually gray. If you turn this on and off, you can see there was a pretty decent green tinge to this. Now I think I've actually added just a little bit too much. But this can be, everybody sees it a little bit differently. I definitely see the color shifting. Look at the gray placemat, and you will definitely see that we have taken the green tinge out of this. Now, what if we wanted to make this look a little bit better? It's supposed to be salmon, which should have red to it. I'm going to add selective color. So we've added a second one. So in selective color, we can say we want to change the amount of color, but just on certain colors. So make sure it's on reds because we only want to change the reds. And we just need to add a little bit, we need to add a little bit of magenta into that. And we need to darken it. So let's add some black. If you turn this off, you will see it has added actually a decent amount of stuff. Let's actually pull the cyan down some and up that magenta. That's a lot more, that's a lot better. Now let's go ahead and learn one more thing. That has, when you make an adjustment layer, it has automatically made this, which is a mask. Okay, so if you click right here, you are on the adjustment layer. If you click right here, you are on the mask. Notice when we click back and forth between these, this is changing. If we click on this, it's showing us that color that we sampled and white. If we click on the mask, it's showing us pure black and pure white. Because masks are made up of black and white. That's all they are. Basically, it means anything that is white will be revealed and anything that is black will be concealed. That is why everything here is white. So it is showing us the entire adjustment layer. Everything has been adjusted. And it adjusted this flower over here. If you turn it on and off, you can see it changed the flower. Well, what if our client or boss says, well, you changed my flower. I don't want you to change the flower. I liked it the color it was. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we're on the mask, and we're just going to go get the paintbrush tool. And you can adjust your paintbrush to be, I'm going to put mine to about 100. And make sure it's about at mid-level softness. That kind of doesn't matter. And you should see this little round thing appear on your screen. That is the size of our brush. You can change the size of your brush in Photoshop or Illustrator by using the bracket keys on your keyboard. If you just click the bracket keys a little bit up and down, it can change the size of your brush. Now that we have the brush, we're going to make sure that we are on black, because you remember black conceals. And then I'm just going to draw black on my mask. Do you see that there's now a little black area right now? So it has not put the adjustment layer on the flower. So once again, I drew black on the mask right here where I was clicked to make sure that I did not put that extra red adjustment layer on the flower. So you can see our first adjustment layer got rid of the green. Our second one upped the red, but we only wanted it to do it right here, so we masked out this. So that's the second way we can do color correction. We've actually learned 3 different adjustment layers: the curves, color balance, and selective color. Now that we've done that, we need to save this for the web. So we know that we're in RGB. So we want to save this for the web. We're going to say File, Export, Export As. And that's a nice, good file size. It's going to be 1500 pixels, which should be big enough for us to use on our website. I'm going to go ahead and say Export. And I'm going to save this as my last name, Food Web. The next file that we're going to open is called Smith Kids. Now, I scanned this in. It was on the wall, and actually there was a piece of tape over it, which broke the photo, and you can see there's some more tape residue. So the first thing we want to do is use the crop tool that we learned, and we need to crop out this other stuff. So let's click on the crop tool, and it probably remembers that 5x7 that you did. So just clear that out. So we're going to go ahead and just make this to crop out any of this weird stuff that was there. When you've got it looking pretty good, go ahead and hit OK. So we do need to fix some of this, but I always like to color correct and deal with exposure first. What has happened with this photo is it is very old. It has been in a home that had smokers, and it has lost some of the pigment. So the exposure and the contrast is looking bad. Here, because we're in the photography workspace, we have all our adjustments up, and there are a lot of these that could fix it. I would like to try the one called exposure. What is good about exposure is it has something called gamma correction. So gamma correction will move just the midtones, just the people. So let's kind of up the midtones a little bit. Do you see that brought the contrast back in? So I really like the one called exposure. So I added about a 0.77 gamma correction. You can kind of tweak that to what you think looks good, but that's definitely looking better. If we turn that off and on, we can say it's kind of bringing some of the life back to that. Now let's deal with the color. Most of you can look at this and see that there is too much red in this. In fact, if we look over at the histogram, I can see, look at all of that red. It's telling us there's a problem. So if you can't see it, I'd like for you to click on, make sure you're on the original layer, and go over here and get the eyedropper tool. And we're just going to select something that is supposed to be white. Now, sometimes it's hard to tell. You could assume that this shirt is white, but it might not be. I'm going to zoom in, Alt scroll my mouse. We also can't assume that her teeth are white because, she's a child. They could be pretty yellow. So you can always usually assume people's eyes right here are white. I'm going to select that right there. And once again, make sure you are on this layer, because if you're on the exposure layer, you're just going to get pure white. If we click over here on the fill, you can see it is not white. It's actually got a lot of red and orange in it. And that makes sense because I told you this came from a smoker's home. So let's fix that with another adjustment layer. So we're going to add, so there are several we could use. We could use the curves that we've already used, but let's try one called color balance. So it's added a second adjustment layer. Now we know we have too much red in this. So an easy way to fix it is to just add the opposite of that, which would be cyan. Now notice here it has, you can do the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights all separately. We do want to deal with the midtones, so let's go the opposite of red, which would be cyan. Off and on, you can see it's taking the red out. Look at her blonde hair. You know how children have very white blonde hair when they're blonde? That is added a lot back into that. So I think that is looking a lot better. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of yellow. So you can look at the settings that I have. I think that's a little bit too much yellow, just a tiny bit. Now that I've done this, I think I do need to up the exposure a little bit more. So I'm going to click back on exposure, and I'm just going to crank that up just a tad more. So if we look at this before we did anything, it was definitely red. We took away the red and we added some of the darks back into it by doing a gamma correction. So now we need to do some basic retouching on these photos. Obviously we have this big problem down here, but if you zoom in, Alt, scroll your mouse, you can see there's a lot of dust and some things that have happened over the years, and some of the dust is directly on these kids' faces. Now, whenever you do retouching, you should make sure your computer screen is clean, because sometimes you'll think there's a spot on the photo, but it's actually on your screen. So see if you've got a clean screen. So we are in the photography workspace. So make sure you're in that, because the tools that we need for retouching will automatically come up when we're in that workspace. And notice I've just kind of picked this up and move it off to the side so I have more room. And you can always close anything that might have opened by clicking right here. So I've scrolled my mouse to get in closer, and of course, hold the space bar down and you get the little hand tool so you can kind of move around. We're going to start on the main girl right here. So we're going to start on this main girl right here. Make sure that you are on this original layer so that all of the retouching we're doing is going to be going on the original photograph. If you have one of the other layers selected, it's not going to understand what's happening. So make sure that you're on that original layer. And we're going to go to the toolbar. These main tools look like little tiny, little Band-Aids. So there's two of these little Band-Aids tools. One is called the healing brush tool, and one is called the spot healing brush tool. We need to grab the top tool, which is the spot healing brush tool. It is the one that has the little round circular thing on it. And when you pull your mouse over, you should see a little circle kind of like that. Yours may look a little bit different. If you do not see the circle, it's possible that you have your caps lock on. If caps lock is on, you won't see the circle. So what this circle is how big our brush is. If you're still not seeing the circle, go check your brush size, which is up here. It may be a really huge brush or a really small brush, and so you can't see it. I've got mine at 35%, I've got mine at 35 pixels. So that's how big our brush is. And of course we can make it bigger, and now you can see the little circle is bigger. I'm going to put mine back on 35. Hardness is how soft of a brush you have. Now you don't want a really hard brush, because then when you retouch it, you're going to see the edge is going to be a very harsh edge. You don't want a really soft brush, because then everything is just going to be soft and you won't cover up any mistakes that you have. So I'm just going to kind of put it a little bit towards the middle. About 60% is usually pretty good, but you get used to that after a while. All right, when we put our brush down here, you can see the circle again. And a really easy thing to do is the bracket keys on your keyboard. It should be right next to the P. If you click the bracket keys up, your brush will get bigger. If you click the bracket keys down, your brush will get smaller. What this is going to do is, if we were to put this over the top of one of these blemishes, it's going to sample the area all the way around that little circle, and then it's going to fill the circle with an average of what it has sampled. So you don't want a really huge circle. So if we have this really big, it's going to sample from her mouth, it's going to sample from her hair. Let's see what happens. If I just click my mouse once, it now samples everything. See, that looks horrible. So I'm going to undo, Control Z. So you need to have a smaller brush, but you don't want it really tiny because then it's not going to do a good job either. So you'll get used to just kind of trying it. I'm going to see what this one looks like. Click, and it has fixed that little spot. So we're going to use this to just go around and kind of fix some of these little spots that we see on her. And let me get down to this one. I'm going to zoom in even further. If we make it too big, do you see that it's going to sample into her lip, which might cause a problem? So make sure that you kind of adjust as you go along. You also have another problem up here. If you sample it too big, it's going to sample into her hair. So go around and try and fix as many of these as you can. But let's stay just in the faces for right now. Now let's look at this one on the little boy. He's got this really long little scratch right here. If we were to make our brush really big, that's going to be a problem because of this dark black. You can click and drag, and it usually does a pretty good job. You can't click and drag for a long ways, but if you're clicking and dragging just a little bit, that does work. So continue and let's fix their faces as best we can. Okay, so I didn't spend forever on that, but it looks pretty good. You guys take your time and get that looking good. Of course, you need to go down. She's got a lot of dust on her shirt. Any shirt little things, fix that. Don't worry about her dress right now. Let's go up and talk about this background. If we zoom in on the background, we can see it's got a lot of dust on it. So this type of little dust we can fix this way. I do want to show you a different tool that may work better for some of these. So let's look at the next tool down, which is the healing brush tool. The difference with the healing brush tool and the spot healing tool is, remember that I said for the spot healing tool that it is going to sample from all the way around that circle. What the healing brush tool is it is going to sample from wherever you tell it to sample from. So I want to make this, but it needs to be two different colors and textures. So I'm going to click Alt and I'm going to sample right there. And that is telling me that is where I want it to sample from. Do you see that it's got both of them? So now when I go up here and click, you see that little plus mark? It is sampling from right there where I did the little plus mark. So when I let go, it's going to make an average between what was there and what it has sampled. Let me try this little booger right here. I call these boogers. I'm going to Alt, sample it, and then click on that. So it's got a different place that it's sampling from. Right here might be a good choice. Let's see how it works on this. So that is the difference between the spot healing tool and the healing tool. So this area up here, there is a lot to work with. So this might take us forever. So let's try a different tool. This one's called the patch tool. Right here, it looks like a little patch. So you're going to click on it once, and it's going to bring you up this little thing that draws. So you're just going to kind of draw just in general around this area. And it's going to turn into something called the marching ants. So that just says we have selected this little area. You then can click within the marching ants and just drag it down to an area that is clean. Now remember, we need to make sure it looks similar so that the texture will be the same. When I let go, it is going to sample from the area that I'm pointing to right now and put it in there and heal it with what was there already. So let go, Control D. It fixed it. Now I see just a tiny little area right here and here where I can see where it did it. I can just use probably the spot healing brush tool to heal that back so that nobody sees that little area. Probably nobody will see it, but I can see it just a little bit. Okay, so we have just learned the healing brush, the spot healing brush, and the patch tool. So finish up the rest of this and then let's go deal with the bottom on the big tape area. Now with dealing with this, none of the three tools that we have used are going to work with it. For instance, if we try to use the spot healing brush tool, remember that it's going to sample from all the way around this and then it's going to give us an average. So it's going to average that white back in. That doesn't work. We could try the patch tool that we just learned, but the same problem with that is it just gives us an average. So you see that it averaged it back in with the white. So that isn't going to work either. We need to learn a new way. So I'm going to go over here to the lasso tool and get the polygon lasso tool. The lasso tool just lets you draw freehand, but the polygon lasso tool lets you just click and make a straight line. So that's going to be easier. Let's get the polygon lasso tool and just click and make a basic box around the white. Now don't worry about our hand yet. We're going to deal with these two separate things. So don't make it too big, but just make a box around that. So we've got a basic selection. Now if you wanted to use, we're going to use something called content aware fill. And if you need to do a basic quick content aware fill, you can just click right here and say content aware fill. But that's not going to work for us here. We need to do a little bit more than that. What we're going to do is go to Edit, Content Aware Fill, and it's going to pop up this new screen. So what this is doing is the AI has decided what it thinks we need to sample from. When we use the Band-Aid, the healing brush tool, it would sample from all around our little circle. But this is going to sample from whatever is green. And you'll see over here, it's on auto. So it's going to look a little bit different on everybody's computer, but it's saying, I've decided as a computer what I think it should sample from. So everything that's green is sampled. I'm not sure why it thinks his hands or this white up here, but it is taking samples from all of this and it's filled this in. So let me actually change it. I'm going to go over here and add to it and let's see if it changes what it's done. I'm just doing this to show you, you don't have to do it. And add some of that red in there. Do you see it changed? Let's add some of this into it. It's completely changed what's happened. So we don't want it to sample from any of that. So that would be this minus. And of course you can make your brushes bigger with your bracket keys. So we do not want it to sample from there or any of this. We just want it to sample from the fabric. I don't want it to sample from her hand or from this white. And I'm not sure why it doesn't think we need that. Let's add that back in. And of course, all of this could be used. That might make a better sample. You know, the more information that the computer has, the better it's going to do. That's looking a lot better. So make sure you're only sampling from things that needs to be. We can zoom in on this and see what it's going to look like. So if yours is not looking that good, that's looking pretty good. Most people would not notice that it's changed. That looks pretty good. If not, sit here and mess around with all of this until you can tell what it's going to do. So I think that looks pretty good. Now down here before you hit OK, it's either going to go to a new layer, onto the layer that's your original layer, or onto a duplicate layer. I actually want to make duplicate layer for this one. So say duplicate layer on the output and then say OK. So let's get rid of our marching ants, Control D, and you'll see we have two layers now. The original layer that had that problem and then the new layer that is fixed. But it still hasn't fixed her hand. So now we're going to take that duplicate layer and fix it even more. Make sure you're on this new layer that we just made, and we're going to deal with her hand. Now, it would be very hard to try to fix just this part of the hand. So what I'm going to suggest is that we just make it look like her hand is not there, like her hand could be behind her brother. So I'm just going to select around the hand. And now let's go back into Edit, Content Aware Fill. And already it's looking pretty good. Let's zoom in. I've got something weird happening right now because for some reason it thinks this little boy's shirt needs to be in here. So let's minus out the shirt. That looks a lot better. I'm seeing a little bit of weirdness right here, but I could fix that with some of the other tools that we have. So I'm going to say okay. Control D. And then I'm just going to go back and fix, I see a couple of little things that people might notice, like right here, and I can fix that with some of our other tools, like say the Spot Healing Brush tool. So now that looks pretty good. Most people would not even notice that we did that. I kind of wish I had made a better selection right here, but you guys can, of course, if you mess up, just try over again. So let's see what we had before and after. That looks a lot better. So once we have that looking better, we need to change it to a 4x5 so we can print it off. So we're going to go to our crop tool. And we're going to say 4x5. Hit OK. And then we're going to save this as a JPEG. So once again, if you get in here and you don't see JPEG as a choice, you can say save as a copy. And now you will have JPEG there. We're going to call this your last name, Smith Kids. All right, good job. So for our next photo, this happens a lot. They were taking this photo of this wedding, and here comes some people walking past. So let's see how Content Aware works on this one. So let's go, and I'm just going to get the regular lasso tool this time. So just click and hold down your mouse, and there is the lasso tool. You can also right-click if you can't see the lasso tool. And I'm just going to draw just a basic around this. We want to leave her flowers. And let's see how Content Aware does. So Edit, Content Aware. Ah, that looks pretty good. Zoom in on it. We've got a couple of weird issues right here that I see. I am not sure why they think we need the couple in here. So let me minus the couple out and see if that fixes it a little bit. That looks a little better. Not sure why not adding in this would help. This. That looks a lot better. I see when I zoom in, I'm seeing just a little issue right here, but we can fix that with some of our other tools. So let's hit, I'm going to put this on a duplicate layer and hit OK. Get rid of our marching ants, Control D. When we zoom in, Alt, scroll our mouse, we just have a little bit of cleanup we need to do right here. Not a big deal. I am going to use the regular healing brush so that I can sample, Alt, click my mouse, and then tell it to kind of add some of this back in. Do you see where, oops. Now, do you see what happened there? The little plus sign is where it's sampling from, and I went down into the sand, and so it added sand. That's not what I want. Control Z, I definitely don't need sand up in this. So when you're using the healing brush tool, you have to keep sampling. So I'm going to Alt click, and look, my little plus sign is going down into the sand. So let's back up. I need to continue to Alt click so that I'm keeping it in where I need it to be. And I'm going to make this a little bit softer so that I don't see my marks. I'm just going to kind of clean up what the fill did. That's looking a lot more natural. So clean up everybody's is going to look a little bit different. Everybody's computer is a little bit different. I don't see any huge problems here. So that was a pretty easy fix. You can save this one. So you can save this one now as a JPEG, last name, beach. Good job. For this last part of the assignment, we are going to kind of put things together to make an Instagram ad. So go and open the one called Tall Female JPEG. And we're going to look at this and see that there are a couple of choices down here that it thinks we might need. So I'm just going to show you these really quickly. If we were to say remove background, it is going to look at this and it does a really good job on any photo that is a person because it understands people. If you were to try to do this with something else, it's not going to do that great of a job. But for people, it does a very, very good job. It went ahead and gave us a mask, and you can see white to reveal, black to conceal. So you can just click remove background and it does a pretty good job. If we were to zoom in though, you could see we could do a little bit better on her hair. So let's back up. I'm gonna actually not use that one and let's do this manually. So let's click just select subject and see what it does. So it has just made a selection for us. So at this point, we could add our own mask and kind of do what we just did, but let's fix that mask first. So several things that you can do with the mask, and a lot of this is down here now. We could invert the mask. So if we wanted to just choose the background instead of choose her, we could click invert that, and now we have the back selected. We could also click right down here and we could smooth the border. We could expand the selection by a couple of pixels. We could feather the selection and make it softer, or we can go into something called select and mask. So that is right here. Let's click on select and mask. And it's going to come up with something like this. So if yours does not look like mine, it's probably just because your view is different. That is over here in the properties panel. So I'm going to click here and you might have it on onion skin. I like the one called overlay. Marching ants makes sense to us, right? Overlay. We can also just see what the actual selection mask would look like. See the black and the white. Overlay kind of gives us a general look at it. Now you can change the overlay. We can make this a little bit more transparent or less transparent. You can change the color, which sometimes helps. If this had a lot of red in it, we might want to change this to a different color. So I like the overlay look. Now, of course, we can zoom in on this, alt scroll our mouse, and when we scroll in on this, we can see we have problems with her hair. Now, Photoshop now has this new thing called Refine Hair. I tend to not like it. It works on some things and it doesn't work on other things. I'm going to show you how to manually do this, but sometimes Refine Hair works great. What I like to use is this second one right here, which is the Refine Edge Brush tool. And you'll see we have our brush on the screen. We, of course, can make that bigger and smaller with the bracket keys. And what we're going to do is zoom in, alt, scroll our mouse. And we're just going to kind of tell it, I want you to refine this. You're just going to click your mouse and drag a little bit and then let go of your mouse. Do you see what it did? Now make sure that you do let go of your mouse occasionally because your computer has to do some computations. So now we can just use the hand tool to move around and see where we need to fix it. Now don't have too big of a brush, but we just need to tell it you need to fix some of these areas. For instance, there's some little hairs sticking up here that it didn't see. If you just go along it, it'll kind of add them back in. That's looking a lot more natural right there. It just added that back in right there. I see a weird problem happening right here, but we can deal with that in a minute. Do you see that it's actually kind of given us some transparency there, but that's okay. I'm going to look around and see if I have any problems. I've got a little problem down here. That looks a lot better. Just kind of looking to see any weirdness. It's mainly hair. Oh, there's another problem. Just telling the computer, let's take a closer look at that. All right, so that looks a lot better. Now remember, if you have any problems with this, you can always kind of cancel it out and back up and come back in and do it again. but I think mine is looking pretty good. Just make sure you don't see any weird little white areas going through her hair. Now I will tell you on some photos, this decontaminate colors is going to help you on the edges. I know that on this photo it does not help. So sometimes you might want to try that. You can look at different choices we made. You can smooth it, feather it, all of that kind of stuff. Before we get out of select and mask, you need to realize right here with the output, it's going to ask you, how do you want us to output this? So you could make it in any of these choices. We want to click that we want to make a selection. So we have just refined the selection that we already made. So there you can see we have the marching ants, and you won't be able to see all these little hairs and things in the marching ants simply because they're really small. So now that we have that selection, you're going to click this button right here, which is going to add a layer mask. And there we go, we have that looking pretty good. We now need to save it as a PNG. We've talked about PNGs, but one of the things that is good about them is it is going to save it with this transparency that we just made. If you save this as a JPEG, it's just going to smush it down over a white background. And that's not what we want to make that graphic. So we need to save it either as a PSD, Photoshop document, but we know those are huge files. So let's save it as a PNG. So File, Save As, go to your work in progress file, make sure Save as a Copy is on, and choose PNG. And then you're going to just save it as tall female copy.png. Now I need you to go back and open up the storm JPEG that you created. Make sure you get it from your work in progress folder. So mine is called Robert's Storm for Web. Yours will be called whatever your last name is. We want to get this one because this is the one that we color corrected. So don't choose the one from my folder. Choose it from your work in progress folder so it's prettier and it's got the blue in it. So let's go ahead and open that. And we already know we've made it look blue. Now we need to make it the right size for Instagram. So let's go back and choose our crop tool that we had before. And instead of ratio, we're going to choose one of the presets. It has 1:1 square, which is what we want for Instagram. So we're going to click on that, and you can kind of choose whichever part of this photo you want in your Instagram. I'm going to move mine over a little bit, and when you get it the way you want, just say, I like that, by hitting the check mark. So now we have our background. So let's zoom out just a little bit before we move on. So zoom out about that far. And we need to place this girl that we just cut out into this composition. So we're going to say File, Place Embedded, and we're going to go place that in there. So let's click on that and go find your tall girl copy.png. And we're going to say Place. And it has placed her in there. Now before you hit Enter or OK, we need to make her a little bit bigger. So just grab one of the left or the right corner and drag it out until she's bigger and kind of move her over like this. When you've got her looking the way you want, now you can either hit Enter or hit the check mark. Now if you ever need to change the way she is again, you can say Control T, and that will bring you back to that where you can size her. So Control T stands for Free Transform. And in Free Transform, you could rotate it, you can do all kind of stuff with it like that. So that's Control T. So we've got her looking pretty good. Now we need to make another little background to separate her from the clouds. So right now we're in the photography workspace. Let's change to the graphic and web workspace. And the reason we change to that is because it brings up this rectangle tool which we want to use. So I'm going to grab this eyedropper tool and I want you to select the dark blue that you have in your clouds photo. So you can see that's the blue we chose. Let me double click on that and let's kind of darken it a little bit. So just move this over, let's make it a little bit darker of a blue, but it'll still match. So now we know we've got that blue selected. So when we select the rectangle tool right here, it's going to automatically put that blue that we chose in there. So we're telling it we want to make a shape, and we want it to be this color fill that we had already chosen, and we want the stroke to be no stroke, so just say 0 stroke. Now we can go and just draw a box over about 3/4 of the screen. Now that looks pretty good, but we have covered up the girl. So go back and get your move tool, and in the layers, you just pick it up kind of by the word rectangle and drag it beneath the tall girl copy. So we kind of see that's a little bit behind it. So we've got kind of something cool going on, and you can kind of move it around a little bit. So select off the box by grabbing the move tool and just clicking down here in layers so nothing is selected. And then we're going to grab the type tool and just click once about right here. And it's going to add, you kind of can't see it because we're zoomed in, we're kind of far away. Let me zoom in. It's going to default to be Myriad Pro at 12 points, which is really small and probably hard to see. So let's go ahead and up that to about 72 just so we can see it better. And the reason we can't see anything is because it's defaulted to be blue. It shows us that it's this color right here. It also shows us up here, and it shows us in properties. So let's change that to white. I just double clicked on it and it popped open, it changes it to white. And you can see it's just added some dummy text there. It's called lorem ipsum. It just adds it in there. We are going to click on, just triple click on that if it's not selected already, and write cloudy enter day. Now I think it needs to be a little bit bigger, so just click and drag your mouse to select all of that, and let's go ahead and make it bigger. So you can select these things this way, or you could actually type something in, but a good way to do it is just put your mouse over the T and you will see that your mouse has changed. You can then just click and drag to the right and just drag it up until it gets bigger. So I'm going to do mine at about 300, and it's looking a little close together. So that's actually called leading. Yours may not look the same. Over here, because we're in graphics and web, we have the character panel. And leading is this one right here. So if your leading doesn't look right, I'm just going to click right here and drag to the right, change my leading. So it's probably set to auto for you guys. It probably looks like about like that. I think it should be a little bit closer. So I'm just going to put my mouse right here, click and drag it a little bit closer. See, I think that looks a little bit better. And one last thing we want to do is right behind the character panel is the paragraph panel. Right behind the character panel is the paragraph panel. I want to change it from being aligned to the left to aligned to the right. That looks better for this. Now grab our move tool and we can move it over. That looks pretty good. So now we can save this. We know because it is going to the web that we need to save this. So save it. So File, Save as a copy. Go to your work in progress folder, and we're going to call this Roberts Insta. Save. So when you are done in your work in progress folder, you should have all of these files. I do not need the tall female copy file because you've already put it in here. So I need all of these attached to your Blackboard and turn them in for this week. There you go. We're done. So good job on all of this. Like I said, this is just the beginning of learning about Photoshop, but this is a really good start. So I hope you have learned a lot.